At -71 degrees Celsius, sound travels differently. It becomes sharper, more crystalline. The crunch of snow beneath boots sounds like bones breaking. The wind doesn't howl, it screams. And tonight, somewhere in that screaming wind, something very small was crying. Nikolai was 62 years old. His beard had gone completely grey 3 winters ago, and his hands, scarred from decades of trapping, splitting wood, and surviving, moved slowly now, stiffened by cold that had settled deep into his joints. He lived alone in a log cabin he had built himself 40 years earlier, back when his wife was still alive and his children still visited. Now there was only silence, and winter, and the endless work of staying alive. His cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by dense taiga forest. The nearest human being was 18 kilometers away. The nearest road was 30. In winter, those distances might as well have been 1,000. He had learned to measure time by different markers out here, not by clocks, but by the angle of weak winter sun, not by calendars, but by the depth of snow outside his door. Right now, that snow reached above his waist, and it was still falling. It was late afternoon, though in December, afternoon and evening were barely distinguishable, when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong. High-pitched, desperate, cutting through the wind. Nikolai paused in his work. He had been preparing kindling for the night, his movements automatic after decades of the same routine. He turned his head, listening. There it was again, weaker, now almost lost in the storm. He pulled on his heavy coat, wrapped a wool scarf around his face, and pushed open the door. The cold hit him like a physical blow, sharp, immediate, stealing the breath from his lungs. The temperature had dropped to -71. At this temperature, exposed skin freezes in under 90 seconds. He moved toward the sound, each step sinking deep into fresh powder. The wind drove snow horizontally into his face, stinging like tiny needles. Visibility was almost zero. He could barely see 3 meters ahead, but he kept moving toward that sound. He found it near the edge of the clearing, half buried in a snowdrift. A wolf pup, so small it could have fit in his 2 hands. Grey fur, barely visible against the snow. Its eyes were closed, its body shook with violent tremors, and it was alone, completely, utterly. Nikolai knelt in the snow and looked around. No tracks, no signs of a pack, no mother anywhere near. The pup had either been abandoned or separated from its family, and in this cold, the result was the same. It would be dead within the hour. The pup was so young, its eyes were barely open, maybe 3 weeks old, maybe 4. Too young to regulate its own body temperature, too young to hunt, too young to survive even one night at -71. Nikolai knew what bringing a wolf inside meant. Wolves were not dogs, even young. They were wild, unpredictable, dangerous as they grew, and more practically, he had almost nothing to give. His winter stores were 3 dried fish, half a bag of flour, and a jar of preserved berries. He had been rationing since November. His firewood supply was low enough that he was already burning his old furniture piece by piece. Taking this pup in meant sharing food he couldn't spare, meant burning wood he needed for himself, meant sleepless nights caring for an animal that might not survive anyway. But Nikolai looked at the pup, this tiny, shaking creature that weighed almost nothing, and knew he couldn't walk away. He removed his scarf and wrapped it carefully around the pup, creating a cocoon of warmth. The pup made no sound, didn't struggle. It was too weak, too cold. Nikolai tucked the wrapped pup inside his coat, against his chest, and returned to the cabin. Inside, he went straight to the cast-iron stove and added 2 precious logs. The fire roared to life, filling the small single room with heat. He knelt beside the stove and unwrapped the pup. It lay in his hands, unmoving. Its breathing was so shallow he could barely detect it. Its small body was cold, far too cold. Nikolai rubbed the pup gently with a dry cloth, trying to restore circulation. He worked for 5 minutes. 10. The pup didn't respond. Then, so faintly he almost missed it, the pup's nose twitched. Nikolai prepared a mixture of warm water and mashed fish, his own dinner, the only meal he had planned for the day. He dipped his finger in the liquid and brought it to the pup's mouth. Nothing. He tried again, gently opening the tiny jaws and placing a drop on the tongue. The pup swallowed. Just barely. But it swallowed. Nikolai continued, drop by drop for the next hour. Slowly, painfully slowly, color began to return to the pup's gums. Its breathing deepened, and finally its eyes opened. Just slits, but open. That first night, Nikolai didn't sleep. He sat on the floor beside the stove, with the pup wrapped in blankets on his lap, feeding it every hour, monitoring every breath, adding small amounts of wood to the fire. Outside, the blizzard raged with a fury that shook the cabin walls. Inside, the world had shrunk to this small space, this weak fire, this fragile life that refused to die. By dawn, the pup was still alive. That was all Nikolai dared hope for. The days that followed became a rhythm of survival and care. Nikolai rationed everything with brutal precision. He ate once a day, a thin soup made from fish bones and melted snow. Everything else went to the pup. He burned furniture when the firewood ran out. A chair, a shelf, the old wooden box where he had kept his trapping tools. Every piece of wood that burned was a memory turned to ash. Every meal he gave away was hunger he would feel later. But the pup was improving. By the 3rd day, it could hold its head up. By the 5th, it took its first wobbly steps across the wooden floor. By the 7th, it whimpered when Nikolai left the room, a sound that pierced his heart in ways he hadn't felt in years. The pup followed him everywhere now. When Nikolai moved to prepare food, tiny paws pattered behind him. When he sat to rest, the pup climbed into his lap. And at night, when exhaustion finally forced him to lie down, the pup curled against his chest, small and warm and alive. Nikolai hadn't spoken to another person in 3 months. The silence had become so complete he sometimes forgot what his own voice sounded like. But now he found himself talking to the pup. Simple things. You're getting stronger. The storm will pass. We'll be fine. The pup would tilt its head, ears forward, as if listening, as if understanding. 2 weeks passed, then 3. The blizzard finally broke. The temperature remained brutal, still hovering around -65, but at least the wind had stopped, and pale sunlight occasionally broke through the clouds. Nikolai ventured outside to gather more firewood. It took him 3 hours to find enough fallen branches for 5 days of burning. When he returned, arms loaded with wood, the pup was waiting at the door. It had grown, not much, but noticeably. Its legs were longer, its fur was thicker, and when it saw Nikolai, its tail moved, not a full wag, but movement. Nikolai dropped the wood and knelt down. The pup approached, sniffing his hands, then pressed its small head against his palm. In that moment, Nikolai understood something he hadn't fully realized until now. This pup had saved him as much as he had saved it. The solitude that had been crushing him, the silence that had been pressing down like physical weight, had been lifted. There was purpose now, presence, life. The winter deepened before it began to recede. There were nights when the stove could barely keep the cabin above freezing, when frost formed on the inside walls, and Nikolai's breath froze on his blankets. But the pup remained healthy, growing stronger every day. One morning in late February, Nikolai opened his door to find the first signs of spring. The snow had started to settle. The sun had real warmth for the first time in months. And the forest, silent for so long, was beginning to wake. The pup, now the size of a small dog, bounded out into the snow. It ran in circles, playing, full of energy that had been impossible just weeks before. Then it stopped at the edge of the clearing and looked toward the forest. Its ears perked forward, its body tensed. Nikolai knew what this meant. The wild was calling. The pup's instincts were awakening. Soon it would need to return to the forest, to find its own kind, to live the life it was meant to live. He had prepared himself for this moment, told himself it was natural, right, necessary, but he hadn't prepared for how much it would hurt. The pup looked back at him. Then it took 3 steps toward the forest, stopped, looked back again. Nikolai remained still. "Go on," he said quietly. "You don't belong here." The pup took 3 more steps, paused. Then, instead of continuing into the trees, it turned around and trotted back to Nikolai's side. It happened again the next day, and the day after that. The pup would venture to the forest edge, stand there for long minutes, then return. Finally, Nikolai stopped trying to encourage it to leave. He accepted what was happening. This wolf pup, abandoned by its pack, had found a new pack of one, and it had chosen to stay. Spring came slowly to Yakutia, as it always did. Snow melted into streams, ice broke with sounds like thunder. Green things pushed through the thawing ground. The pup continued to grow. By April, it was the size of a medium dog. By May, it was unmistakably a wolf, larger, stronger, wild in the eyes. But it remained. Nikolai built a small shelter beside the cabin, a place where the young wolf could sleep outside when the weather allowed. He taught it to hunt with him, tracking rabbits and ptarmigan through the forest. And slowly, without either of them planning it, a routine formed. A partnership, a bond. One evening in early summer, as the sun hung low over the forest, Nikolai sat on the single step outside his cabin. The young wolf lay beside him, head resting on its paws, completely at peace. Nikolai thought about the night he had found this creature dying in the snow, about the choice he had made, about the hunger and cold and exhaustion, about the furniture he had burned and the food he had given away when he had almost none for himself. He didn't regret it, not for a second. Because in the harshest place on earth, in the coldest depths of winter, he had proven something he had almost forgotten after 3 years alone. That purpose comes from caring for something beyond yourself. That companionship doesn't require another human, just another life that needs you as much as you need it. And that even at 62, even in isolation, even when everything seems set in stone, one small choice can change everything. The wolf had been abandoned. Nikolai had been alone, and together, in a tiny cabin at the edge of nowhere, they had saved each other. The sun dipped below the tree line. The temperature began to fall. Though summer's cold was nothing like winter's, Nikolai stood slowly, his joints aching, and walked toward the door. The wolf rose and followed. Inside, Nikolai added wood to the stove. Not much, just enough to take the evening chill away. The wolf settled in its usual spot near the fire, and in the warm glow of firelight, surrounded by the familiar sounds of the forest, 2 survivors rested together. No words were needed, no promises made, just presence, just the quiet understanding that comes from enduring winter together. Outside, stars began to appear. The forest settled into its evening rhythms, and in a small cabin that leaned slightly to the left, a man and a wolf, who had both been left for dead, proved that survival is never just about staying alive. Sometimes it's about choosing to save something other than yourself. Sometimes it's about finding family in the most unexpected places, and sometimes In the coldest place on earth, that's all the warmth you need. The fire crackled softly. The wolf's breathing was steady and deep. And Nikolai, for the first time in 3 years, fell asleep, not to silence, but to the sound of another living thing beside him. And that made all the difference.